statistics about Florida this, and I'll talk about some of those, but sometimes just little stories tell the tale. And so some of you may have seen this. I think it was a couple months ago. CNN, of all places, was investigating they were illegal aliens that would create criminal rings, and they were stealing and looting a lot of places in New York City. And it turned out that when they would get the proceeds of this, they would want to try to come to Florida to spend the money. And so someone on CNN asked, well, why don't you steal in Florida? They said, because in Florida, they put you in jail for doing that. And so they didn't want anything to do with it. And I think that that's something that, that really shows, the differences. And if you look around the country, you got to have good policies. I mean, you guys have so many great people working for you and your leadership. But if we started enacting Illinois or California or New York policies, you guys would get kneecapped very quickly. Illinois, for example, they abolished cash bail, making it easier for dangerous criminals to get out on the street after an arrest. And this is after that had already been done and failed in places like New York, and they still went and did it. Los Angeles defunded police by $175 million. San Francisco has reduced by $120 million for police budget. NYPD has gone $1 billion due to budget cuts. This is all basically since 2020 that's happened. Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Say what you want about it. It used to be a clean and relatively orderly city back in the day. Now, from 22 to 23, which is the latest statistics we have, homicides up 37%, motor vehicle theft up 103%, robberies up 70%, and violent crime up 40%. And this is estimated to cost D.C. $3.2 billion annually, which, of course, falls on criminals, or falls on the taxpayers and not the criminals. And so we've seen examples of what's happened. We've done the opposite in Florida, and we're better off for doing the opposite in Florida. We have done things with funding. Now, our budget in Florida, some of you have already come up to me and thanked me for different things, and, we had to go through these line items, and my view is that when you budget, you're not just budgeting for the year in question, but you got to think about what's going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20. Very few people in elective office actually think that way. That's part of the reason we're $34 trillion in debt in D.C. But my view is we want to be sound fiscally for a generation. So this year's budget came in, and I had to do some budget vetoes, but we actually spent less than we did last year. And I think we're probably the only state in America, or one of the few, who's actually reducing spending. Yet, while we were doing that, we had record funding for education, record funding for teacher pay. We had record support for Everglades restoration, record support for transportation and roads and bridges, which is important, and huge support for law enforcement and a number of different programs that we've been able to do. And so we have a massive budget surplus. Since I've become governor, the Florida's debt from the 1800s until the present that I inherited, we've paid off 36% of that in 5.5 years. So, and we're going to do a lot more over the next 2.5. So that means by having big surplus, we've, I think, tripled or quadrupled our rainy day fund since I've been governor. What that means is, if something happens with the national economy, if you had some type of big crash, and you never know, these things can happen. If things start going haywire, Florida, you're going to be fine. We have the funds, we do what we need to do, and we keep all the core functions of government working just fine. And that's really what it should be. A lot of these states that are doing poorly, they're not even fiscally solvent as is. And so if anything more happens, they're going to be in big, big trouble. But just with some of the things we've done, we've had this law enforcement recruitment program to give people $5,000 after taxes to new recruits who relocate from other states, or the young people that decide to do. A lot of people don't talk about that. They focus on, oh yeah, this person's fleeing Seattle because it's such a dumpster fire to come to Florida, and they get $5,000, and that's a win for Florida. And it is. Chicago, New York. I mean, you guys have these folks in your agencies, but the majority of those $5,000 checks are people that are new to law enforcement, that are choosing law enforcement as a career. And we thought that was important because law enforcement's come under attack, and we want to show people that it's a noble calling and it's a good career. And in Florida, I think it is a great career. Honestly, like, I would not recommend, if some young person came to me in like Chicago and said, should I join in Chicago? I would say no. Like, why would you put yourself in that situation? They come to me in Florida and say you should join. I'd say absolutely you should join. You'll be able to serve the community. You'll be able to have support from the community, and you'll be able to make a difference. And so all these things matter. So that $5,000 is important. Obviously, things aren't getting any cheaper in this country, and so it just helps because you're not going to be a millionaire working in law enforcement. But I think it's more of just the symbol that says, the state of Florida really values this, and we're willing to cut a check for $5,000. And through that program, we've welcomed nearly 1,400 new recruits from different states and territories. Of course, the biggest chunk is from New York, Illinois, and California. And I'll never forget being in California a couple years ago. I land, I get greeted by a police chief of a nice area in Southern California. And I was like, how's it going? He's like, I'm doing great. Just all my officers want to move to Florida now. And so, Southern California, that used to be the place everyone wanted to go. And if they had sane policies, that probably would still be the place everyone would want to go because it's a beautiful area. But that's just what you're doing. So we've seen that. And we've awarded $36 million to date just in that program. So that's something we launched a few years ago when I was governor. And we're going to continue to do that because it's been very successful. We also, during the COVID, the 2 or 3 years during COVID, we were trying to, okay, they're defunding police other places. We're not going to do that. But we did $1,000 bonuses for every single sworn law enforcement officer for 3 years in a row in the state of Florida. I mean, that's a big, big deal, and we're really proud of that. We've also enacted really strong policies. In 2021, on the heels of some of the worst riots in the modern history of the country, we passed anti-rioting legislation, which did a number of things. One is it prevented local governments from defunding law enforcement. And the reason why is because, why would I let them cut off their nose to spite their face? It's like you could have 5 people on some city council and 3 of them, want to indulge in this idiocy. Why should the citizens of their municipality have to bear the brunt of those dumb decisions? And so we say we'll be able to restore the funding. So defund the police is a total non-factor in the state of Florida because of the actions that we've taken. We now have the ability, and in that law, we also gave protections for law enforcement to be able to defend against riots, and we got sued on it. And it goes, and they always find a judge. Judge said, oh, there's a problem. So then it went to appeal. Then the appeal said, well, send it to the Florida Supreme Court to tell us what this means. And then the Florida says, hey, it's fine. So we won on that, and so there's zero basis for any federal court to do anything with our anti-rioting legislation. And so that is in effect, and we're going to continue to enforce that. But we're proud. We were the first state in the country to step up and do that. We also have created the Florida Law Enforcement Academy Scholarship Program, tuition and fees up to $1,000 of education expenses for trainees and enlisted law enforcement officers. Again, not a lot of places are doing that. We're proud to do it. We've also recognized that folks who are in law enforcement can help our communities, and so if you want to expand your families, you can get incentives for adopting from the state foster system, $10,000 benefit for adopting a child in need, or $25,000 if you adopt a child with special needs. And we've had a lot of people in law enforcement that have stepped up and taken advantage of that. We also have understood that we have an open border in this country. That's creating a host of problems. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we see the drugs that are coming in, really dangerous drugs. It used to be, you bust somebody for methamphetamine or something and you would do it. Now, you bust somebody with fentanyl, you could end up dying from being exposed to the fentanyl. And so we signed Senate Bill 718 this year, which provides criminal penalties for someone who exposes a first responder to dangerous substances in their possession. That's usually going to mean fentanyl. when you're talking about these types of situations. We've also signed a lot of great bills this legislative session. SB 1036 increased criminal penalties for illegal aliens who return to the U.S. after being deported. HB 1451 prevented counties and municipalities from accepting IDs or driver's licenses issued to illegal aliens by outside jurisdiction. Look, if you want to have less illegal immigration, then don't provide benefits for illegal immigration. And so we've really been strong and led the nation on that. In places like California, they issue you ID, government benefits, all that. Well, of course you're going to have people that are going to go illegally and want to go for that. HB 1589 increased penalties on people who operate a vehicle without a valid license. And as I mentioned on the budget, we did do the scholarship program, or the signing bonus again. We also did $9.3 million to support efforts to combat opioid epidemic affecting Florida's communities. More than $17 million for the enhancement of important criminal databases, and there's a lot of different things that I know many of you have been concerned about. And then $40 million for enhanced 911 call services. And we tried to be very supportive when there were different line items, in the budget. I mean, I remember seeing, Cronus Chad here, are you here? This Hillsborough, there was I think it was $7.5 million for some rotary wing assets, and I had to gulp very hard before I gave the okay, because it's a lot of money, but we did, and we wanted to make sure that we were supporting law enforcement and all that. So I think if you look at our policies, promote law and order, our actions support the men and women of law enforcement. Our budget provides funding, particularly where appropriate with some of the rural areas to be helpful, and the results really speak for themselves. A couple other things that I think bear mentioning. One is, we have this Constitutional Amendment 3 that's going to be on the ballot in November, and it is basically an attempt by a Canadian marijuana company to use the Florida Constitution to give them an ability to have almost a monopoly on selling marijuana, which is just not the way policy should be done. But it also basically creates this really broad right to possess and smoke up to, I don't know, some law enforcement have told me 3 ounces, how many joints that is. Some say 40, some say 80, but bottom line, this is a lot. It has been tried. This happened in Colorado. Most people there regret that it happened. It's happened in California. You smell it everywhere. New York, all these places. So the arguments were, when this happened in Colorado, was, look, people are going to use marijuana. And look, we have medical marijuana in Florida, and we have other people that do. I understand that. And that's not someone using marijuana like in their home is probably not something that law enforcement is going to view as a high priority given everything else we have. Having said that, the reality is this is something that was pitched as, because of that reality, if you legalize it, you can tax it, it's above board, it's safety, and it eliminates a black market. Why would you have it be a black market? Well, what's happened in Colorado, they have the biggest black market they've ever had. California has a big black market, and so it's actually led to way more drugs. It's led to more dangerous drugs coming in, and then when you have that, more people using drugs generally, there's going to be other drugs that the market is going to increase for. And so it just didn't work, and I understood the argument for it. It didn't work, and there's a lot of people there that definitely regret it. There's some people, like business owners. Some have said, well, I don't really like it, but I'll just tell people you can't do it in my restaurant or in my hotel. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think this is written so broadly with no limitations that people are going to assert the right to be able to do this, regardless of what a private property owner said. If you have a public accommodation, yeah, maybe you can keep someone out of your home, but if you have a public accommodation, you're going to strip somebody of this broad constitutional right? It gets dicey. There's going to be litigation. There's going to be a whole host of things, and I would imagine law enforcement is not going to just want to deal with it at all. And so even if the business owner was right on the law, I would imagine most agencies are going to say, look, we're just not dealing with this given what's in the Constitution. So I don't think it portends very, very well for the state of Florida. We have a track record of this being done in other states. It just hasn't worked, and we just have to be honest about that. I think that that defeating this, I think more people kind of get the negative that's happened, but I also think just there's people that when you read the summary, it doesn't tell you really what the amendment says. That's why it should not have been let on the ballot. I mean, the court's job is to not allow things on the ballot if the summary isn't an accurate reflection. And it really isn't an accurate reflection because it doesn't show. We have medical marijuana in the Constitution. Voters passed that. If you read the text of that, there's all these limitations. Like, okay, you can apply for a card, you can be restricted from, time, place, and man. There's all these different things. This amendment, and you don't see the text of it, the voter doesn't see the text of it, they see the sanitized summary that's been poll tested in focus group, that eliminates, the actual text eliminates every limitation that was in the medical. And so, I mean, honestly, the right for the marijuana use is going to be a broader right than your First Amendment right to free speech, your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. I mean, it's ridiculous. So this isn't going to be good. It's not going to be good for law and order. It's not going to be good for quality of life. And so I know many of you are involved. I know the Sheriff's Association is helping to be able to combat Amendment 3, and I think we need to do that. We got to be rational about these things. And I have credibility on it because I came in. Medical marijuana passed in 2016. I became governor in 2019. It really hadn't been implemented. And my view was like, look, I know some people, a lot of people like it. Some people don't. A lot of my voters didn't like it. But I'm like, this is the Constitution. I'm going to enforce it. So we did. And we've done that faithfully. And there's a lot of people that have used that. And I know not everyone is really in dire need medically. I mean, some people are in dire straits. Other people, have like a back spasm and they go in and get a card or something like that. So I know that's going on. But that's just the reality in Florida, that program has been implemented as the voters intended. And so I think we've struck a more moderate course on this. And I think what Colorado's done has been very extreme. I think a lot of people there regret it. I think California's been extreme. I think a lot of people there regret it. But why would we want a bigger black market for illegal drugs in this state? That is not going to end well for anybody. The other thing that I would point out is, look, I don't mean to be political, but I hear this stuff in wake of this weekend's news, where you have these very, very partisan liberal media saying, oh, Biden, what a great, unbelievable accomplishments and all this stuff. I'm just thinking to myself, opening the border is an accomplishment? Having 13 Americans get killed in Afghanistan with that disastrous withdrawal, inflation, all these other things. But perhaps two of the biggest failures are the open border and the Afghanistan fiasco. And there's actually a relation between both of those failures that I think affects our communities potentially. And it's just this. So there's a lot of folks who, in the wake of what happened in Afghanistan, these are people that had served in the global war on terrorism from 9/11 until very recently. They have contacts there. There were private citizens, like from Florida, that were helping rescue people out of Afghanistan, and how that went down was a real disgrace for the country. And of course, we lost 13 service members, but we also have created now a situation where these terror training camps are up and running. I mean, they're cycling through a lot of would-be jihadis over there. The U.S. government, I think their view is like, hear no evil, see no evil. And so that's bad. Maybe you could say, well, how does that affect us? If we had control of who comes into our country, maybe it wouldn't have a big impact on us. But our country has had 9, 10, 11 million people come in the last 3.5, 4 years. And I point out, we know terrorists have come in through the southern border. DHS will say that there's people who are on the terror watch list that's come through. And I remember saying that last year, and one of the media is like, oh, that is not true, all this other stuff. And now there have been people that have been arrested connected to ISIS and all these other stuff. And my view is you can't have 10 million people come in. You can't have a border that open and not have our enemies take advantage of it. Are we really to believe that this soft underbelly, that our people that want to do us harm would just say, no, we're not gonna try to exploit that. Of course they're gonna try to exploit that. So just talking with a lot of people in the community who've been involved in this, who still have contacts over there. They're not even in the government anymore. But their view, and I think this makes sense, is the training that's being done is not to do another 9/11 where you take down the equivalent of the World Trade Center. The training that's being done is to try to do another October 7th, like was done in Israel, where you go to some community and you have people, terrorists that are going to kill as many people as they can, and that creates risk for American communities. There's no question about that. So that's bad enough. But I think what even adds to it is a lot of the feds, they're being told in the bureaucracy, terrorism is the thing of the past. They're being told not to worry about it. I had somebody who was a targeting officer back in the day that just went on DHS websites, like, okay, I think I suspect some terrorist activity, and this was in Florida, submitted it, and instead of them taking it and wanting to follow up, they sent back, you should talk to your local authorities. And they're like, who? And they said, the local division of emergency management. And I'm like, what? And that was what the U.S. government was telling somebody who was concerned. And look, I think part of this was testing to see how the response would be. I'm not sure, that it was necessarily something that was right per se. But the Division of Emergency Management, look, we have great Division of Emergency Management. There's no other state. You wouldn't want to be in a hurricane, but there's no other state you would want to respond than the state of Florida. And it's not just because we're doing things at the state level. It's because every county, a lot of these emergency management departments do a really good job. But counterterrorism is not something that they're charged with doing. Counterterrorism has always been something that the federal government really has taken the lead on, partially because they have the information. They get the intelligence that can emanate in foreign countries. You as a sheriff, you don't have intel coming in from Afghanistan to your sheriff's department. It's just outside your purview. But what that tells me, and what I've seen is, I think that they are acting like now the terrorism is really just a local issue. So this is something that we're going to have to step up and do more for, because since 9/11, it's really been the various federal alphabet agencies that have been taking the lead, and it was almost like if you wanted to do a lot locally, they would tell you, no, this is our purview. I think you've seen a shift over the last few years. I think some people just think the threat is no longer. I don't believe that. I think the threat is real. I think we've got a lot of soft targets now in this country. And so from the Florida perspective, I think what we want to do is say, okay, if they're going to abandon the field, then what do we need to do to be able to lean in and be aggressive if this were to come to our state and our communities? I mean, we do everything we can in Florida. I mean, we stop the boats when they try to come from like Haiti. We pass legislation to prosecute people who smuggle in illegals from the border, and the courts struck that down. We're appealing, but we've thrown the kitchen sink at this. The reality is people get across that border. Once the federal government turns them loose, they've got a lot of birth to be able to do a lot of bad things. And so I think the combination of what happened in Afghanistan with the open border, I think it presents a threat to this country. And I think the way the threat is going to be, again, is not to try to do one spectacular attack where you take down big landmarks. And maybe that would be part of it, but I don't think that's the primary. The primary is going to be, going into some community and just doing really, really horrible things. So be on the lookout for this. Understand that a lot of people in the federal government at this point are trying to move beyond terrorism. Look, I would move beyond it if it wasn't a threat. Yeah, fine. But when you have camps, when you have things that are happening, and you have an open border where you're not policing who's coming into your country, you have some serious, serious threats. that you're going to have to contend with. And so, we may see some of this shake out differently over the next 6 or 7 months in D.C., as we get through this election, which I think would be welcome to see a change in posture. But in the meantime, I think the core responsibilities of local and state, as we've understood them since 9/11, I think are probably in need of a little bit of a change, and it's not going to be easy, and we don't get access to the information that the feds do. I mean, there's no way that a sheriff's department or a state agency is going to be able to do what a federal agency with access to information all over the world would be able to have. So it's a bad way that they're going, but I do think they're expecting the locals, and I think they're trying to say it's a local responsibility at this point. So just understand that, understand where we are. Hopefully nothing happens in the state of Florida, but clearly there's a lot of bad people out there. There's a lot of people that have bad designs for our country, and there'd be a lot of places in this state and in other states where they would love to be able to cause a lot of mischief and a lot of mayhem. So we want to be helpful at the state level. We're thinking things through about, okay, if the federal government's not going to be doing some of these core responsibilities, how do we work collaboratively together with local and state to be able to try to fill some of these gaps? I don't think physically we'll be able to fill all the gaps, or even most, just given that we're not getting the same information that they're getting, and we obviously are not in control of who's coming into this country the way they are, but I do think that there may be some opportunities for us to work together to protect our people, and we'll do what we need to do to be able to try to stay ahead of these things. But I just leave you with that because I do think it's going to be an issue somewhere in this country. There's going to be something that happens, and people are going to be able to point to the border, and I fear they're also going to be able to point to training that happened overseas leading up to someone coming across the border. We shouldn't be making it so easy for these people. It's a really, really bad set of policies that's been in place for the last many years. However, you guys are doing it right. We appreciate everything that you do. We appreciate everyone in your agencies. We appreciate the collaboration that our municipalities have with our sheriff's departments and both the municipal, county levels working collaboratively with the state of Florida. We're going to continue to lead by example, and we're going to continue to show everybody how it's done. Thank you all. God bless you.